Hello, Gregory. Welcome to Queerly Beloved.
Hello there. I'm very happy to be here.
Oh, thank you. I'm so happy to have you and so excited to have this conversation today. So, thanks again for making the time for this. So, I'd love to start with the first question I begin all my interviews with, and that is to take a breath and get grounded and tell me who you are today in this particular moment. But tell me by describing a drag avatar that embodies that. And it doesn't have to be like a drag queen. It can just be any kind of avatar that really embodies who you are in this particular moment.
Wow, that is an interesting question, and I wonder how many people fumble the way I'm doing
Well,
through the
I can
first
go first.
paragraph.
So no,
Okay,
there's
so yeah, go first, and then I'll tell you about my history of drag avatars.
okay, perfect. Okay, yes. No fumblings happen. No fumbling at all.
Uh,
Okay. So let me tap in. I often start with what I was already naturally pulling in terms of my clothing today, which is green, and I am feeling this moment of growth and feeling this kind of green vibe today. And so what's coming through is like poison ivy type character, she's like connected to the earth, she's like wrapped in vines, she's remembering the nourishment that happens when she is present to her connection to the earth and the energy that gives her. And so yeah, as I'm describing her, I'm also seeing some blonde hair. I'm seeing maybe some snake energy even. Maybe that's bringing in the erotic. Maybe I'm desiring some erotic connection today. I mean, that's just coming through as I speak. So yeah, I'm feeling this kind of poison ivy avatar today.
well, that is very instructive, and thank you for joining me in my therapy session. And I'll send you the bill at the end of the hour. The truth is that it is an arresting question for me because for most of my life, I have been peculiarly uninterested in disguises and in
Mm.
transformations.
Mm.
I'm old enough, and I'm older enough than you, to remember the straitjacket Eisenhower era, which is when I was born, and how my first years were before 1960, and to remember the feeling of being incarcerated, even as a child before the age of 7, in a
Mm.
certain kind of maleness that I knew was not going to be a good fit for me.
Mm.
But rather than disguise myself, which I think a lot of people do, and I have no
Mhm.
objection to it, rather than disguise myself at my young age, I felt that my job, even long before I could articulate it, was to strip away the false drag of heteronormativity
Mhm.
that I was raised to put on and to take that off. And
Mhm.
so for me, I have lots of friends who love RuPaul. And in
Mm.
fact, I have a bunch of friends who gather every week that it's on, and I call them the RuPaulines, like there's some sort of Christian sect, following the sacred teachings of RuPaul, who is very wise and very
Mm.
consoling in many ways. But even though I go because I like the company of these
Mm.
guys,
Mm.
um, it doesn't connect with me.
Sure, sure.
I think I'm too old, and I think I fought too hard to
Mm.
put disguises down
Mm.
in order to take them up willingly. Now, that said, if you to answer your question,
Mhm.
because this is a parlous time in which we're
Mhm.
living, and I'm speaking ecologically, I'm speaking politically, I'm speaking internationally, I'm speaking in just about every metric system you can use.
Mhm.
I find that sometimes, including about 2 weeks ago, I am in a position where I need to be a spokesperson. And I'll give you an example. About 2 weeks ago, I spoke at a county courthouse about a half an hour from my home. I
Mm.
was invited by the judge who presides over that courthouse to speak to a number of state officials, a number of police officers, some of whom I was sure were working for ICE,
Mm,
a group of lawyers, some kids from the local high school. It was a day of law, and I was probably intended to be the cultural division or maybe the comic relief. I don't know, because people spoke very soberly about the need for a rule of law.
mm,
When I got to, I was the last person on the program, and when I got there, I said, "Look, I see I'm the only man in the room who is not wearing a tie and
mm,
a button-down shirt. I wore a jacket and I wore a t-shirt. And I said, for me, this is a kind of drag if I had to
mm,
put on a tie and
mhm,
a button-down shirt. That would be a falseness to me. And
mm,
although I knew to honor the court, I should probably step in line, I couldn't do it. I
mm,
couldn't do that drag and be
mm.
honest to myself. So I'm sort of answering your question in the opposite way. It's
Yeah.
what I refuse to put on that liberates
Yes.
me rather than what I identify myself because I spend my whole life identifying myself with characters the way you just did with
Mm,
this wonderful kind of earth goddess
mm.
serpent character. Uh, so I that's my answer. I think
Yeah.
I've tried to embrace the Henry David Thoreau quote that says, beware of enterprises that require new clothes."
Mm,
I've I've tried to strip down in my humility and in my honesty, and to the extent that I can, to my essence, rather than to build it up. So it's just a different
mm.
instinct.
Oh, it's so beautiful and intriguing. I really appreciate that take on my question and
Yeah.
the thoughts that it's percolating for me already. And I do love this idea. One of the quotes I love by Harry Hay is to remove the ugly green frog skin of heteronormity and reveal the hidden prince within. And
Uh-huh.
so I loved you mentioning, stripping yourself of, and it's also funny that we're now in the world of greenness, and then there's alphabet, which I wasn't even being conscious of.
Yeah.
But so yeah, there's something really beautiful about that, and I agree that so many queer folks have worn masks in order to survive the world, and so it is a funny thing to then be playfully putting new ones on. And I suppose when I approach it, the idea I try to approach it not from a energy of disguise, but an energy of I am so much more than just this body here.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how can I find those other aspects of myself using this tool or this access point of drag to help create a bigger expression of self that's more comparable to how big this potential light is that is my unique consciousness.
Makes total sense to me. And so I will piggyback upon that and say, in a way, for a creative novelist,
Hmm.
anytime you put on another character, that's a drag act. You know,
Yes.
I mean, Elphaba is my drag act. Elphaba is
Yes.
my drag name.
Yeah.
So too is her son, Lear. He's a drag artist because he's not me, but he is me.
Hmm.
And I've written 44 books, so I basically half of them have women or girls as main characters, and I suppose those are drag figurines of myself.
Hmm.
Um, uh, but I do that all the time. I do that for a living. I've done that since I was five, and
Sure.
that's part of what directed me toward making things possibly when I was five and thought, oh, this is a scary world because my
Hmm.
father and the men I see up and down the block going off to work in their snap-brimmed hats and their gray flannel suits.
Hmm.
I knew it. I knew by the time I was five, I was not going to be able to do that. I did not see myself as gay, obviously. I thought I would grow up and get married to a woman and have kids and have a family. I didn't see anything, but I knew I could not be so boring
Hmm.
to wear gray and
Hmm.
wear a hat and walk downtown every day like all the fathers in the neighborhood around me. Sorry,
Hmm.
I'm gonna lift this up and take it off. Oh, do you mind if I take this?
No, go for it, please.
We
Yeah.
can cut this out if
Yeah.
need
Let me
be.
hit
Okay.
pause. Yeah, no problem. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And I would say, yeah, heteronormativity is kind of boring in some ways. And
Yeah,
so it is exciting that queer folks have this opportunity or invitation to think outside of that box. And when you were talking about the grayness of the suits, it kind of brought me into the world of The Wizard of Oz, with where we got to start that movie in black and white, and then there's that moment, that Technicolor moment, when we suddenly get to see all the colors. And I remember as a kid, I would watch that moment. I'd like watch where it goes from black and white into color, and then I'd rewind it and watch it again and
oh
again. It
wow.
was so magical for me. Every time it like took my breath away. I'm just curious about your relationship with that movie, and I mean, as I was saying it too, it's like I wonder if that is something that queer folks are witnessing on some unconscious level. There is this connection that many gay men in particular have with that film. Of course, I imagine it in part has to do with Judy Garland, but maybe there's something else. I'm curious about your relationship with that film and your thoughts on that film and its connection to queer culture.
Sure. And I will say that because I'm older than you and because we were from a slightly disadvantaged background, we only had a black and white TV, and I didn't know that the film was
Mm.
in color until I was in
Oh.
my teens. But that did not erode the possibility of magical transformation when Dorothy opens the door and steps into Munchkinland. Indeed, I've just recently I heard about how that particular scene was filmed.
Mm.
I always had understood, I don't had always guessed that there was some kind of splicing involved,
Mm.
that they took Dorothy in the house and shot that, and then they dropped in, the color sequence with, razor blades and
Mm.
second cameras and stuff. In fact, that was that the house, the room, Dorothy's parlor, bedroom, wherever she is. It was filmed in color, but they painted the walls and they lit it and they gave her costume to look like it was black and white.
Wow.
And the actress who opens the door to Munchkinland is not Judy Garland. The actress is somebody else. She opens the door. The camera goes over her shoulder into Munchkinland. And
Mm.
Judy Garland, I think I read this or heard this, is actually standing outside next to the house, and she steps into the frame in full color. So it's two different
Whoa.
actresses. Now, isn't that
That's
amazing?
a fun fact. That's
Yeah,
amazing.
yeah. I don't know. I saw it. There's so much about Oz this year,
Sure,
thanks to
sure.
it in part. And so I'd never heard that before, but
Cool.
maybe it's not even true. But I like to think about it. Um, I've been recently working on a potential memoir that I've just
Mm.
sent to my publisher.
Nice.
And one of the things that I found myself writing about was about that exact scene. And
Mm.
that even without the benefit of color and the transformation from the drab black and white Kansas to the full Technicolor Munchkinland, there still is a sense of magical possibility when Dorothy leaves her home and arrives in
Mm.
Oz, over the threshold.
Mm.
And one of the things I found myself writing, and I had never really thought about this before, is that for a child watching that movie, when you land in Munchkinland 2 with Dorothy, you have finally come to a place that is scaled to you, that the
Mm.
Munchkins are child
Mm.
size and the buildings are child size, and God is there too, but God is small, and you've known this all along as a kid.
Mm.
And you walk through into the full color world that is ready to accept you even down to its scale. And
Mhm.
that never occurred to me before.
No, me
And
neither.
I think it's part of why we who saw it as kids,
Mhm.
found ourselves so welcomed in that whole story because from the
Mhm.
very beginning, a hand reached out to us and said, "You have, you're not too small for here. You're,
Mhm.
you don't have to wait. here is satisfaction, here is color, here is all the things like gay boys love, song and dance and but I remember watching as almost as an architecture student how the Munchkins came out from around the houses and through the doors and down the road, and just feeling it was a vision of paradise, and I
Hmm.
and I was welcome there. I had a place there too, and
Hmm.
I love that. I didn't really know that I thought that until I was writing that paragraph in my memoir.
Oh, I love that so much too. Yeah, it was mysterious how, for me, connecting it was so immediately. But my story with it is that yes, we had a color TV, and we also had just purchased a VCR. So that dates me a little bit too. So we had a VCR, and it came on the TV as it did every year. And so we recorded it, but it was the very first thing that we recorded and the only thing we had recorded. And then shortly thereafter, I got chicken pox. Do kids still get chicken pox? Maybe that's dating me too. I don't know. But
I no, I don't think ours ever did. They might have had been inoculated or something.
I feel like every kid got chicken pox at
Yeah.
one point. It was like a rite of passage. So I got chicken
Yes, right.
pox.
Chicken pox with a calamine lotion. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So that always meant that you got to stay home from school for a number of days. And so I stayed home from school, and we had this one VHS, and I just put it in and played it, and then again rewound. I mean, I'd watch that one particular scene, but I'd watch the whole thing again and again and again. And then eventually, later in life, I got to be a Munchkin in a community theater production of it. It was my very first play. And then I stuck with community theater for many years and eventually got to play the Scarecrow. So it's been a part of my
Wow.
karmic cycle in a funny way.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow.
And I feel I read a story about you like casting it with your school friends. Is that correct? Was there
Oh
some?
yes, yes. I am from a large family, and I was often in charge of babysitting on a Saturday in the backyard with a locked fence, and
Hmm.
so and also I was just a kid with big ideas. I sometimes think that in any large family, there's usually one kid who's the manager or the boss kid, and I was centrally placed. I had three older, three younger siblings.
Perfect.
And I was the one who would decide what we would do. And because something was always happening in our yard, because I was in charge, other neighborhood kids would come by to see what's going on at Maguire's, and I would sometimes say, "Well, we're doing Wizard of Oz today. If you want to be in it, come over here and stand there, and I'll give out parts." And we would do this. We did it a couple of times. We did it after it had been on TV, and all the school kids had been worked up to a lather of excitement over being able to see it again. So yes, I assigned roles, and we didn't need to run through the script or the beats of the storytelling because we'd all seen it the night before, and it was as well known to us as the story of the birth of Jesus.
Hmm.
So we got started in the backyard, and I would say my sister Annie is Glinda, and somebody else is Dorothy, and I was usually the Scarecrow because he was the best. Uh, but after we'd run through the story, I mean a bunch of school kids under the age of 8 can act out The Wizard of Oz uh, in about 12 minutes, even though it's a 92-minute film, uh, if you leave out all the music. And we just ran from that corner of the yard is Munchkin Land, that corner of the yard is Witch's Castle, and so we'd run around and play.
Oh,
But after the first run through, I began to lose my crew because it was done, and now what? And I'd say, people, shape up. Let's not lose focus. We're going to do this again, and we're going to change it up a little bit now, and we're going to switch the cast, and we're going to this time, you be this one, you be that one, and you be Captain Hook, and I would import some other element
hmm.
into the story, and some of the littler kids would squawk and go on strike and say, "Captain Hook isn't in this story." Say, excuse me, it's my story. I'm the author now. And in my version, Captain Hook arrives about a third of the way through, and he and the witch meet and fall in love, and they have twins. Um, so that is uh, that is something that kind of inspired me to understand that all stories are they're malleable, and
Mm,
once you add some new material to them, they're not they can't end the same way. They are
mm,
adjustable, and you begin to own them yourself. I didn't
mm,
actually put it into so many words that way because all kids play. You know, they play house, they play school, they play cops and robbers, or we used to
mm,
cowboys and Indians. We used to. Um, but once you own it, once it becomes yours, you actually get to dictate how it works. And this is a metaphor, among many others,
mm,
of what it means to grow up and to actually own the world. Own the
mm,
skin, own the drag you're going to put on or the drag you're going to reject. You just own
mm,
the whole thing. And I think it's terribly exciting
mm,
and it's terribly empowering when
mm.
kids play and when they really throw themselves into their work because play is work for kids.
Absolutely. And to receive that lesson that we are the authors of our own stories, that we are the story makers of our lives, and that we get to playfully create, we get to playfully co-create these lives that we're living, and to experience that through, yeah, through play in that way. I think that's beautiful. I also think it's just really telling and fun that you were playing in the world of Oz as a kid and then later as an adult exploring it deeply.
Yes. Well, I must have. A lot of these questions are questions that I have asked myself because of this 9 month act of, writing a memoir, which
Sure.
at the start I thought, who cares what happened to you? And you didn't run an international corporation and you didn't solve, solve the problem of cancer or anything. So why would you bother? But the more I thought about it, the more I thought, well, you have had your life. And
Mhm.
just as you were talking at the beginning before we started rolling
Mm,
about um, people uh, either embracing or rejecting the kind of faith traditions in which
mm,
they grew up. The truth is, I was a faithful kid, a devout kid, and I
mm,
had to make adjustments between the notion of what does it mean to be pious and to honor the truth of what was taught me, and at
mm,
the same time to accept the fact that I'd been given like a kind of charism with an enormous urge and a need to make things and to make stories and to tell things and to be the boss kid. You know,
mm.
I had to work with all that stuff,
Mm,
in my head at the same time. So,
mm,
I do think that kids learn so much from play though, because
mm,
they learn confidence among other things. They also learn
mhm,
by watching themselves what it is that they want to change in the world.
mhm,
They learn that by playing.
mhm. Absolutely. And I think adults learn a lot from play as well. I actually am part of a improv troupe, and I have got 10 people who come to my house every Tuesday night, and we play for 2 hours. And
Wow.
yeah, and it really does help with confidence. It helps with just thinking creatively and
Yeah.
working together. It's a very diverse group of people that I would never hang out with regularly, but because we have this shared passion for improv and play, we come together and create these wild, weird stories every week. So yeah, I find it a tool for adults that is underused as well. It's something that I want to bring more into
Yeah.
the zeitgeist. So
Yeah.
yeah, we started you started talking a little about your Catholicism. I'd love for you to share more about that, what it was like growing up Catholic. What is your relationship with Catholicism? How has that ebbed and flowed, or yeah, anything you want to share about that?
Sure. There, just as one can say about people who identify as Jewish, you can identify as Catholic because you were raised Catholic, because you were raised in a Catholic milieu, an
Mm,
environment, a ghetto, if you will. All those three words apply to me. And even if you have shucked off the strong conviction of a child that what you were taught was literal biblical truth, and
mm,
as true as the laws of physics or the laws of chronology or time, um, that you still can, not only can you remain Catholic, I think you can't fail to remain Catholic if you were
Mhm.
raised Catholic in a certain way. You can
Mhm.
turn your back on the church. You cannot believe anymore. You can actually be angry at it and try to tear it down, but that doesn't change your identity.
Mm.
The best you can claim is as a recovering Catholic, which is a
Sure.
new phrase, but it speaks to the point that your identity is shaped in childhood.
Sure.
So I am a person, to go right out on a limb, I'm a person who was raised Catholic, who considered very intently in my late teens and early 20s whether I would go into the church and become a priest,
Wow.
uh, and who is I don't know if a proud or humiliated or what. I don't know how to describe it. I remain Catholic. I identify as Catholic. I call myself a Catholic. I don't go to church very much anymore.
Hmm.
Uh, But being Catholic is inseparable from me. It's as close to me as being gay. I can't take the
Mm.
gay part out of me. I can't
Hmm.
take the Catholic part out of me either. I
Hmm.
don't believe dogma the
Hmm.
way I believed it when I was 7 or
Sure.
when I was 12 or when I was 22.
Mm.
I think of it primarily as metaphoric. Uh,
Hmm.
but there are times when my confidence about it being a metaphor wobbles, and
Mm.
for a few minutes, I have access to an older sense of conviction and hope
Mm.
that was more that was more literal, and then
Hmm.
that fades away too. The one thing I've learned over many years of thinking about this and arguing about it to people who think you can't be intellectual and Catholic. Those are it's like
Mm.
oil and water. It's impossible. And I
Mm.
said, well, so sue me. What can I do? This is who I am.
Mm.
Um, but I also have realized that I believe that faith and doubt are like two sides of the coin of being
Mm.
alive, and you can't have one without the other. You really can't. You can't even have doubt unless you can conceive of the fact of a possible faith on the other side of it. Even if you can't name it, even if you can't spend it, even if you can't revolve the coin to see what's on the other side, doubt doesn't have any meaning unless it's contradictory to faith. Faith doesn't have any meaning unless it is argued against by doubt. And I think
Mm.
those are, as William Blake might put it, contrary states of the human soul. That's what I
Ooh.
believe.
Ooh, that's good. That's juicy. Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. It's interesting. There's a sci-fi show my boyfriend and I are watching right now called Foundation, and there's a character called the Empire, and it is a ruling king authority who has found a way to clone themselves. So they just pass themselves along each generation. So they've been ruling for lifetimes and lifetimes and
Ah,
lifetimes. And last night's episode was confronting this ruler with the idea that he has no doubt and has never learned or known doubt.
oh, really? Huh.
And the confrontation was also around the lack of soul, that this ruler has no soul, and that as a result, there's no opportunity for a soul evolution. And so I don't have a question yet, but I just want to share like what you're sharing is like super percolating in me
Yeah.
right now. Um,
Wow.
yeah. So it was bringing through for me last night this idea of the value of doubt.
Mhm.
That because when they said that to his character, I was thinking, well, lucky guy. Like, yeah, he's never experienced doubt. Like, that's great. I wish I never had doubt
Yeah.
because I'm often coming up against doubt and trying to get rid of it, trying to,
Yeah.
how can I just have faith that, faith in something and the great mystery, the great spirit, whatever that may be. How can I have faith in myself and get rid of all that doubt? And yet, perhaps part of our journey and the lessons we're meant to learn is being confronted by it and in relationship with doubt and that play between faith and doubt. There's value to that.
Oh, well, I think there is, and indeed you might say that the play between faith and doubt is the time stamp on every second of the life that you're given, or the life that has come to you.
Mm.
is actually a proof of a pulse. You know, faith
Mm.
and doubt is pulse. It's a pulsing um, experience. It's a pulsing action, and I
Mm.
am not frightened of doubt. And I'm not frightened of faith either. And I'm not frightened not to be able to answer the question any more deeply than I just have. That
Mm.
is who I am. And that's how I prove to myself that I'm alive every day.
Mm.
And even if when I die, um, the questions of faith and doubt have only been an intellectual puzzle that dies with me when my body is deemed, dead on arrival, then that's okay because it has
Mm.
given me the pulse of life during my time
Mm.
here. And that I think is a holy, that's a holy thing to me who believes in some kind of holiness. Holiness to me, one definition of holiness is the paying of attention.
Mm.
Many ways that we pay attention, including by enjoying art, including by loving our lovers, including by respecting and honoring and questioning our past and imagining our futures. It's attention. Anytime we pay attention to that which is significant, I believe we're expressing a kind of holy, HOLY, um,
Mm.
commitment to existence, to being alive, and to the
Mm.
reality of eventually being dead. It's still holy to pay attention to all that, I believe.
Mm. Yeah, just receiving that. Yeah, it's calling me into a deeper awareness of the importance and sacredness of presence, of aliveness, of being present and aware of my aliveness and
Hmm.
all the beautiful, miraculous blessings in every single moment that we get to experience this aliveness.
Hmm.
Yeah, that is holy indeed. We kind of started talking about soul, and Alphaba famously says, "I do not believe in souls, or at least not my own." And I'm curious if you could share a little more about perhaps your thoughts on soul and your thoughts on the questions posed within your writing around souls, or the intended questions.
Well, one thing that I think writing is for is to, I mean, creative writing is to raise questions and refuse to answer them.
Yes.
That's what I think we throw ourselves into art that qualifies as true art because it demands us to consider its issues, and it will not draw a black line at the bottom of the column and give us the answer.
Yeah.
That's our job as purveyors of music, as purveyors of literature, art, poetry, dance, whatever it is that floats our boat, as it were.
Mm.
So when I wrote about Elphaba in Wicked 30 years ago, published 30 years ago this year, one of my deepest ambitions was to make her as human as possible
Mm.
and as less like a stereotype that we could reduce as possible. And therefore, it meant I had to bequeath her with complications of character, as
Mm.
we all have, not simplistic, you know, what is the Miller Briggs no
Mm.
the Meyer Briggs character does. I wanted her to be represented by every one of those 16 blocks because we
Mm.
all have everything. Um, so she could be political, she could be romantic,
Mm.
she could be ornery and selfish, she could be selfless and brave and cowardly, as we all can
Mm.
be, all of those. But one thing that I had to make sure that she could be is a person of both doubt and a person of hope, because
Mm.
that is, again, the twin states of the human soul.
Mm.
Um, Blake called them innocence and experience, but I think you can use his little buckle
Mhm.
to describe our complications as human beings for almost any pair of attributes. And
Mm.
in my case, doubt and faith are a pair of attributes that Elphaba strives for.
Mm.
She makes loud and kind of cutting juvenile statements about not having a soul. But you, as a reader, have to say, what is she saying? Does she mean this? Is she
Mm,
telling the truth?
mm,
Is she betraying a need, an appetite, a fear? Maybe all of those things at once. That's what art does. It makes
mm,
us ask questions like that. And so if you take that in, then when you get to the end of Wicked the novel, which ends very differently than Wicked the play or Wicked the
mm,
movie will
mhm,
end, uh, you realize the last action in the story of a woman who has been searching for half the novel for forgiveness
mm,
is to have to face the fact that Dorothy is asking her for forgiveness, and
mm,
she is being asked for the one thing that she needs herself.
mm.
And and then Dorothy splashes her with a bucket of water, which I consider a kind of baptismal splash.
Wow. Mm,
She, and she does it in my novel not to kill her, but to save her because of a bit of her burning broom has actually fallen on her skirts and she's about to go up in flames. And Dorothy is rescuing her by paying her attention and by trying to douse the flames. That, of course, reduces her to whatever she's reduced to. But it also may liberate her in the last instant of her life and transport her toward soulfulness, if you.
mm,
That's it may not either. It may just
mm.
be, she may have just melted or she may have fallen through a trapdoor. We kind of think we never really know. But all those things are possibilities. And
Mm.
I didn't set up the whole novel for 407 pages to get to that point. I didn't realize that was going to happen until I was writing the last 5 pages and Dorothy
Wow.
finally got it. And then I saw, oh, this is what this has been about all along.
Wow.
She wants the fullness of being alive. And as a human being, you can't be fully alive without a soul.
Oof. Oof. So good. Wow. I'm also just taken by this idea that you got to discover that in your process of that story making. Is that
Yeah,
typical for you that maybe even with your memoir that some of it's coming through like, oh, I'm doing this because of this message or this
absolutely. Well,
question?
that's the only reason to be a writer, as far as I'm
Mm,
concerned, is that it unpacks the secret, locked storerooms and
mm,
dusty corridors of your own past and your own thinking. The
oof.
only way to find out what it is, for me, because
Mhm,
I'm pretty glib. But I'm not particularly intellectual. For me, my journey of self-discovery is through my creative subconscious. And I follow it and I try to notice what I see. I try to pay attention to what my creative subconscious tells me. And it's always smarter than I am.
mm,
So I rely on it.
that's beautiful. It's almost like writing as an act of prayer or art as an act of meditation.
That's perfectly said, and I do believe I would stand behind both of those definitions. Not everything. I mean, I wrote I wrote a book once called Six Haunted Hairdos. I don't think that was particularly, it might have been a little drag, but it wasn't particularly.
It wasn't the
uh,
deepest prayer, perhaps.
but we all, there are, one thing that I often say, Will, right? Is
Yeah.
Will?
Mhm.
Yeah. One thing I often say, Will, is that there are many ways to suffer as there are human bodies on the planet.
Mm,
We all suffer independently and we all suffer alone, even if we recognize scraps and aspects of our suffering in others. Suffering is a unitary experience, I think. The corollary of that is there are as many ways to pray as
mhm,
there are human beings on the planet. And I think that
mm,
whether the concept of prayer or the idea of it is consciously important to us or not, unless you're a sociopath or severely ill cognitively and in some other ways,
mhm,
um, that our intention is to motor our way through any hour with with intentionality,
mhm,
with uh, with a motive toward accomplishment and with a belief that accomplishment is possible, even if it's just accomplishing, I'm going to find two apples that aren't rotten to feed to my starving children.
Mm,
All those are acts of prayer, I believe. There's many ways
mm,
to pray as there are people who have to struggle through any given day of their lives.
I love that message. Thank you. Yeah, so let's see. As we wrap up, I know we've got the next movie's coming out, so I imagine you're bracing for another entourage of yeah, attention and energy towards this story. What are some of your hopes or anticipations around how folks will receive Wicked for Good, and maybe specifically around the questions that you're hoping folks will receive from it? I don't know how closely connected you are to the production or how aware you are of what they're going to present, but yeah.
Well, I do know a couple of very small spoilers that I won't share.
Sure,
Uh,
sure.
but um, I've always taken a very distant back, when the limousine of Wicked has been coursing down the highway, I usually wait for the city bus and have to make two or three transfers. And that's intentional. That I
Mm,
think is healthier for me and and easier for the company. I do feel that when Wicked Part One came out last November, by the time I saw it on the screen, I had almost seen too many trailers, and I'd almost seen
mm,
too much of the design and too much of the performances.
mm,
They shared very little of the musical performances while in the trailers, but even though the movie was delicious, delectable to me, and I saw it about 7 times in theaters,
mm,
uh, I still was sorry that I had seen so much. So this time round, I am scrupulously turning my head and not clicking on the trailers, and I'm
nice.
not reading the stories, and I'm not checking out the blogs of people deconstructing what the trailers are hinting at. I don't
Mm,
want to. I want to go in as close to being a virgin as I remember
nice.
what it used to be like. So I'm liberated from that.
Mm,
I also think that to the extent that I was needed or my publishers needed me to put myself front and center last fall, I did a lot of press. I did national press. I did national photo shoots. It was overwhelming, and
mm,
I'm actually a fairly shy person. You wouldn't know it, but I am.
mm,
Uh, and so I don't want to do that this time. This is not the end of my career, nor is my memoir, I hope, the last thing that I'll ever write. But I'm
sure.
definitely on at the, approaching the landing strip of what I'm able to do in my 80 and 10.
Mhm.
Um, so, in fact, I think fourscore years and 10 was basically I'm at.
Because that means
Uh,
like 50, right?
I mean 70.
Oh, 70. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I think a score is 20, I believe.
Oh, it scores 20. Okay, okay.
Yeah, yeah. Unless I'm wrong. But at any rate, I'm going to continue to write while my brain is still functional because, as I've told you, that's how I think. It's how I
Mhm,
process. It's how I pray.
mhm,
It's how I siphon off extraordinary anxiety about where we are in the world
mm,
uh, and where I am in my own life. But all that being said, I feel I don't need any more attention in this life from anyone other than the people whom I love. And
mm,
many, many people I love. I've been blessed with brothers and sisters and with a wonderful husband and with several former boyfriends and kids
mhm,
and many, many, many close friends, all of whom cherish me, and I recognize it. I
mm.
don't need I don't need Vanity Fair to come with the photo crew. I don't need to have rouge put on my sallow cheeks. I don't need cherry red on my lips to make me look like a harlot. I'm not doing that drag. If you see me, I am just my own quiet, shabby little gray self. I'm going back in Dorothy's house and sit down and be gray at last. Uh,
You can hold the
just
door open.
just like I tried not to be when my father was walking up to work in his gray suit. I guess I'm going to live in Dorothy's gray house, but I will always look out the window at Munchkinland and be
Mm.
grateful it exists, and be grateful it existed for me in my life too.
Oh, that's so beautiful. Thank you. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Any final words of wisdom, questions you want to leave the listeners with? Any final thoughts? And no pressure. If you feel complete, that's
Well,
wonderful.
I will say this one thing because I did mention that at one point I had been curious about I really wanted to be a priest
Hmm.
uh, about 2021. In fact, I applied to a couple of seminaries. And then I went off to Europe. And when I came back, I had a joyous reunion with a young priest friend of mine, uh, who was, I'm sure I was wanting to emulate him. And that was part of why I thought, well, I could be like you. I
Hmm.
could have a life of value and of contribution in the priesthood, because I like people, I love people, and I believe in prayer and the goodness of God and all that.
Hmm.
And so I talked to him about it, and he said to me, uh, Gregory, don't do it. And I said, really?
Hmm.
Well, why? And he said, the church is a wonderful place for people to throw their lives' energies into, but you have more to give than the church will allow you to give.
Hmm.
Church will ask you to denature yourself in order to do its work. And you are too full of creative lust,
Hmm.
to cut your gift down in the service of God. Let your gift flourish.
Hmm.
Give to the world that way. In a way, he was saying, go undercover. You,
Nice.
you don't need ordination to do the good work that you feel you're called to do. Do it by being the best writer you can be, and
Hmm.
the composer. And I mean, I did everything. I painted, I composed, I wrote songs, I
Wow.
played. You know. And that was one of the best pieces of advice that was ever given me.
Hmm.
Even though I loved the church and I admired the people I knew, it was a time in the church when I happened to be very lucky and live in a very liberal, progressive parish in the most progressive diocese in America at that time of my
Nice.
youth. So what I saw of the church was the sort of like the Obama rebels, we're gonna
Nice.
and uh, and that's what it felt like to me. That's what I thought I was going to be joining. But he was a little bit older, and he recognized there were more shackles to be
Hmm.
attached at ordination than I was aware of, and he advised me against it. That was one of the best pieces of advice I ever got in my life.
Hmm.
And so to close, when you ask, is there anything more you'd like to say? I'd say draw your wisdom from whatever voice is speaking most clearly to your interior, past your own systems of drag or draglessness. It's your job to listen to the clearest voice, and that will tell you what to do, how to be holy, and how to pay attention to your life.
Beautiful. Thank you so much. Yeah, and I hear in that too this invitation to find your prayer. Find the way that you are meant to pray in this world.
That's a good way to put it. Yes, that's a better way to put it, indeed.
Sure. Well, it came also
Yeah,
from you saying that there's so many people and so many
yeah,
ways to pray. It's like, so
yeah,
find it. Find what's
yeah.
right for you.
Right. You'll know it. You'll know it. Every now and then we get a scrap of it, and we get a little bubble for 4 seconds of,
Mm.
and it goes away. That's okay.
Yeah,
Relish 4 seconds and remember it.
it's the pulse. Ah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
beautiful. Thank you so
Yeah.
much. This has been such a joy.
Oh, well, my pleasure, Will. I don't do this very much, and the only reason I agreed to do this was because the subject really is interesting to me. The
Mm.
intersectionality of sexuality, creativity, and faith really is something I think about all the time. I don't
Mm.
know how they affect each other, but I do know they're related. So here
Mm.
we are.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.